All right, looks like we're live. Welcome in to another episode of the Real_G Warner on Twitter, going through a soccer slate. This time it is the World Cup qualifiers, which unfortunately gets a lot less attention than I think it deserves. And also, sorry for not being with you. My back is a disaster, and we'll see if I make it through this episode. But without further ado, we're going to go in order of kind of what's being played. It's Wednesday here in the United States, Wednesday afternoon. And everything starts really in the wee hours of tomorrow morning, specifically with Asia. So the plan is I'm going to go through the first leg or first match in some cases of this international period, and then try to give an idea of who's and what they're fighting for. Because there's a lot of spots that are already wrapped up, plenty that are not just yet. And I'll try to give a lean on some of these games as well. So first one to start with is Australia and Japan in Asia. So as a good podcaster, I have the World Cup qualifying standings already up. Iran and South Korea look like they have basically clinched their spots from Group A. From Group B, Saudi Arabia and Japan are ahead of Australia, who's on 15 points. So that makes this a pretty big matchup because the fifth spot gets into a playoff with, I think it's CONCACAF as their opponent, but we'll see. Ultimately, we'll start with this one because it's a pretty big one. Australia only 3 points behind Japan right now with a better goal differential. If they win this match, I'm sure that puts them in a lot better place. So they're going to be going all out for a victory, and they get to host the Japanese. I think one nice thing about the Japanese is they're really strong. They have a lot of players across all of Europe, which is where the top soccer and football in the league or world is being played. And I feel like a stereotype of Asian teams in this contest is that they're really well disciplined, a lot more disciplined than a lot of their opponents. But that's actually a really good stereotype to have, I think, especially as an underdog. There's been some movement and some bets coming in on Australia overnight because I did look at these lines last evening. Japan is a pick 'em right now, but might climb to a quarter. I think at a quarter, I'm interested. I don't know that Australia is as strong as it has been in the past. I think that's pretty clear. And Japan is just constantly putting players all over Europe, especially in the Bundesliga and other places like that. So I'm very interested, especially if a draw would win any sort of return on a Japanese defense that I think will be really tough to score against, especially knowing that if they get a point, Australia probably can't catch them, or literally everything will be in Japan's hands. They'll have a 3-point lead going to that final match. Draw might be enough, or would be enough, clearly. So I think that puts them in a good position. Certainly going to Australia from Japan is it's definitely a road trip, probably a flight, maybe a boat, probably a flight. And so I think it's one of those where we'll see how much money ends up coming in Australia and make sure the Japanese lineup looks what you need to have. Next on the list is South Korea and Iran. And both of these teams are the top two in the group, or Group A of Asia qualifying. So both of them are way ahead of the UAE, who are 9 points, 11 points behind South Korea. I believe I took the Koreans in this matchup the first time they played a goalless draw as a quarter goal underdog. And Iran are actually a half a goal underdog here, despite leading the group. I think South Korea, they've got a lot of talent. I think they're better than a lot of people would expect. When you think footballing nations, you generally think Europe or South America. But Iran also has some good talent throughout a lot of the European leagues, playing in Champions League and things like that with Mehmedi and others as well. I think currently looking at South Korea, who I think is kind of disappointed, especially sitting in second place, as probably are the best in this group. I guess the only difference here is that Iran's won 7 matches and drew the match they played each other, whereas South Korea has only won 6. But I do think that there's some questions about motivation here for sure. I think the road team would probably be the more apt to struggle for motivation when they're pretty much already guaranteed a berth in the World Cup and might want to rotate some players and not take anybody. But then again, the World Cup is coming up pretty quickly. So I think you want to try to establish some sort of way that you know how to play together, because it's so hard to have anything congeal when you're away with the national team. So for so like little time, so 2 weeks every few months is way different than playing with your club team. So I want to say that there's probably, and we've seen it in South America as well, with Brazil and Argentina already clinching and playing a lot of their good players. Maybe not Messi, but Brazil certainly playing a lot of their studs that I think they'll probably want to be keeping as much momentum going as possible. So these might be good lineups. I think Iran with a draw on the road, paying a full bet, that's of interest to me. We'll see where this number goes. Currently all the juice in Iran, so it might fall to a quarter, and that would make it a little bit less likely for me to play. Next is Lebanon and Syria. Not really playing for anything. Syria, a quarter goal underdog. Don't really have much to say on a lot of these, unfortunately, especially if they're already out of a race. Vietnam hosting Oman. Vietnam, a quarter goal underdog at home. They're bottom of Group B. Oman's in the middle. China, Saudi Arabia. China getting a goal and a quarter. Saudi Arabia is already, they haven't won it yet, but they're the leaders in Group B, at 1 point ahead of Japan and 4 ahead of Australia. Victory certainly clinches their stay or gets them to the World Cup, to Qatar. So that's probably a very important match for them, and they're probably going to go all out to win it and not leave it down to the last match day later this period. And so that makes me China. I just don't think it's good enough yet, though probably in the future with all their people, they might be. Iraq, then a pick 'em to the UAE. Iraq lower by 4 points actually in Group A, but haven't won a match yet, and pick 'em not a lot for me to do with. Moving out of Asia, finally, as we're killing a lot of airtime there. But going to Europe straight away, and this is going to be awesome. Don't really know what's going on with Russia, Poland, Ukraine. Crazy that Ukraine and Russia were drawn to the same little pod. But this is going to be awesome because there are a lot of good teams here, and not all of them are making it. The first match is Italy hosting North Macedonia. Currently, Italy a 2-goal favorite. Big number. North Macedonia did play in the Euros this summer, and do have some good young talent. They, I think, said goodbye to Goran Pandev, who I think retired from the national team at the end of the Euros. And there's questions certainly about really who and what North Macedonia are going to be without him. But they do have a goalkeeper that plays for Rayo Vallecano, I believe, in La Liga. They have a player at Levante, currently bottom in La Liga, but certainly a good talented player in Enes Bardi. And they got a lot of players in other leagues as well. It probably doesn't make sense for me to name all of them off of memory, but I got a few in here, promise. I think from what I see with Italy is that they were so good, won the Euro, and it's hilarious to see them in this type of competition in a playoff that they might not even make the World Cup. I mean, it would, I guess, be such an Italy thing to do. But ultimately, from where I sit, Italy's a 2-goal favorite is a really big number for a team that will probably play pretty conservatively. I don't think that they're going to really go and try to win this match 4-0. I think they're really going to try to get a 1-goal lead and sit on it, which makes getting 2 goals from North Macedonia pretty interesting. The problem is that there's a pretty big difference in talent in this matchup. Certainly there's some players for North Macedonia, as I already mentioned, playing in big leagues, but you also need to have that talent congealed and know how to play together and be able to score goals, likely against Italy, because they'll be throwing everything forward at the end of a match if they're down 1-0, because it's the do or die game. But I do think that extra, I guess, or that full second goal of insurance is pretty nice if it's pretty close late and they're trying to hang on and might give up that late goal to lose by 2, and then you take a push. Next, we have Portugal and Turkey, a more competitive match based on the number. Portugal, a 1.25 goal favorite with all the juice, so maybe climbing to 1.5. From where I sit, Turkey were one of my favorite teams going into the Euro and were the biggest disappointment, I think, by far. I mean, some teams didn't go as far as they expected, like France, you could say, but Turkey not even getting out of the group and finishing, I think, bottom was pretty shocking to me, especially with some home field advantage also in play or in place for them as they had some matches in Azerbaijan. But anyway, Portugal, big disappointment not to get qualify automatically. And I think the winners play. And so one of Italy and Portugal will make the World Cup, which is sad for soccer viewers, but I mean, it's their fault. They didn't get the necessary points to get there. Turkey, the defense was a big problem in the Euro. I don't know really that's changed much. Demiral has been playing really well for Juve, but it really hinges, I think, on his partner, Soyuncu, or maybe if he even lost that spot, I feel like he'll probably be there. And he's a walking red card, really scary to make big mistakes, compiling them by doing silly physical tackles or pulling people's shirts when you're on a yellow, like a lot of things that are really questionable and difficult to deal with. Whereas Portugal, I got to say their offense has been pretty disappointing considering what they have at their disposal. Bruno Fernandes playing with Ronaldo. I mean, you can see that at Manchester United that hasn't gone swimmingly, to say the least. But I mean, plenty of other really good players for Portugal throughout, and makes me wonder if Ronaldo should be starting. I think it's probably fair to say he should, but I think the questions are starting to come up more and more as he gets more and more time on those legs. Looking at Turkey, getting more than a goal, a bigger number than I expected. I'm just not sure that they're in a position where I want to back them based on how they looked, unfortunately. I mean, it's a good spot to buy them low because they certainly won't be overvalued based off their Euro performance, if you want to call it that. But ultimately, I think from where I sit with them, I'm not sure that I feel good enough to challenge a Portuguese side that's so strong and has so much talent and is playing all over Europe because they're one of the best, biggest nations and really shouldn't be in this playoff. Sweden then hosting Czech Republic. Sweden team I really like. They used to be a really defensive side that have kind of added some offensive players thanks to their young studs, really. And Isak at Real Sociedad, though he hasn't been playing great. Kulusevski, who's really taken off since he went to Tottenham and finally got on the pitch, which I think was a big mistake at Juve. They weren't playing him enough. Sweden as a half a goal favorite, those are a pretty big number for them to lay, especially considering how well Czech Republic did in the Euro. You could potentially argue that were in a really soft group, and that was a big step for them. But ultimately, another big problem for Czech Republic is they're going to be missing Patrick Schick. At least he hasn't been anywhere near the rotation or playing or in the team for his club side anytime recently. And so I'm concerned. I mean, Leverkusen would have played him because they've been starting no forwards lately because they didn't have any available. And I imagine that means Patrick Schick is not available for this one. Without him, that really takes out a big goal scorer after he had an awesome summer and was playing really well in the Bundesliga as well until his injury. I think when you look at the rest of the Czech Republic, it's really trying to figure out what of their talent is good enough. You have Souček coming in from West Ham, also Sofal, who were really good together for a little while. Souček still seems like a clear Premier League starter and stud for a long time. Sofal has kind of fallen out of the rotation, and I'm not sure with a lot of the acquisitions and a lot of player transfers have been made by the good Czech teams like Slavia Prague and Slavia Praha, or Sparta Prague and Slavia Praha. But a lot of that talent has left and gone overseas, which I think shows that people do respect the Czech football academy or system, or that they just have good players in their nation. I think they can give Sweden some trouble. So I'm looking at them getting a half of a goal, but I'm going to need to look at their lineups. And currently all the juice is on them as well. So if anything, it looks like it's going to fall to a quarter, which is about what I made it. And I'm not sure there's a lot of value there. The other matchup for the playoffs is Wales and Australia. Currently a pick 'em with a little more juice on the road team, Austria, which is a little bit surprising to me because I feel like the UK sides, international nations, get a little bit more respect from odds makers than I think they should because there's a lot of money bet in England or in the UK in general. I don't think Wales are very strong. Gareth Bale hasn't been playing a lot. Ramsey finally got off the Juve books and is playing somewhere else. But like, there's a lot of questions I think about Wales. They do have some players sprinkled around Premier League sides, but that's also because they're so close. And I think that's just one of those things where a valuable Welsh asset, is more valuable than one from Spain or something like that. So I think they're willing a lot to take those risks. I do know that they certainly have played in the Euro, both of these sides. Austria did a better job and ended up getting through, which was impressive. Wales also were in the running, and I think we're better than a lot of people thought they would perform in the Euro. But pick them, not a lot for me to do with because I want to bet an underdog here and hope that they go to extra time or something like that. I don't think that's going to happen here because I can't imagine Austria is going to catch enough money for Wales to jump that high of a number as a home dog. I feel like that's very unlikely. Austria is very talented. They have a lot of players in the Bundesliga. Some are really out of form. Like I think of Martin Hinteregger from Frankfurt. He's been so bad this year. And I don't really think it's an age thing. I think he's just been struggling and it's getting worse. But there are some young, talented players for Austria. You want to check what those lineups look like because I know Baumgartner was missing recently for Hoffenheim, and there's a lot of questions about really who's going to be available. So it's going to be very important to keep your eyes on lineups once these come out about an hour before kickoff. Sometimes a little earlier for some more organized countries. You think probably Germany would be one of those, though they're not playing in this competition right now because they've already clinched. But some also a lot later, which I usually look at the South American clubs. Or countries. Moving to the CONCACAF, and we'll get to the U.S., who have done some extensive research, or a lot more than I have on all these other clubs or nations. I'm going to keep messing that up. Jamaica hosts El Salvador in a battle of 6 versus 7. No hope for either of these teams to get in the playoff. Unfortunately, it's really no hope for anybody except for Costa Rica and Panama at 16-17 to try to get themselves into the automatic spots or out of the playoff, more importantly. And so Jamaica and El Salvador, I think Jamaica has been one of the bigger disappointments in this octagonal, whatever we're calling it. They're, I think, more talented than they've shown. Goals have been flying into their own nets. They've given up the second most behind only bottom side Honduras, and that's usually how it goes. They haven't been scoring enough, and their defense hasn't been good enough, and they love taking red cards, which is a really scary thing, which makes me interested in backing El Salvador potentially on the road. though only 6 goals in 11 matches. Asks a lot for El Salvador to go on the road to Jamaica and score. I mean, certainly if there's a red card out there, makes it a much more likely scenario, a lot more space on the pitch, even if El Salvador has one as well. This might be a tough match to handicap where it goes. I think Jamaica is a half a goal favorite. It's a little bit pricey for what Jamaica has shown, especially sitting behind 2 points behind El Salvador. I would urge you not to just look at the table and say who's better based on how things have gone. But I do think Jamaica has been disappointing enough because they do have some good talent. Mikel Antonio, who knows if he's even coming for this match since they're eliminated? I can't imagine he would. And West Ham have a lot to play for. But El Salvador certainly is one of the smaller nations. They've done really well. I mean, even going back to the Gold Cup this summer, I think they were really impressive and have been pretty good in this table, despite ultimately not going to be in the running for the World Cup after the last window. Moving to Panama and Honduras. Currently, Panama is in 4th place on 17 points. They're 4 points behind Mexico and the U.S., but a big win here, especially with goal differential potentially coming in. They want to be, I think, going nuts, trying to score as much as possible. Honduras have given up 22 goals in 11 matches, so 2 per match. It's pretty high in an international competition that doesn't really have a lot of goal scoring because people don't play with each other a lot. I kind of paid the price backing Honduras in good positions against teams that were really struggling, and they've been a wild card magic potion for teams that were really struggling. Panama have a lot of pressure. I thought they played really well at Mexico, if I'm remembering the correct game, and deserved a lot better than a questionable penalty kick that was conceded. And it seems to be one of those things in a lot of these soccer matches ultimately. And I think that's why home field advantage matters, because the refs are a lot of times struggling to make calls that don't support the host. Anyway, Panama needs a win here. All the pressure's on them. I consider them more of a defensive side, but ultimately they're playing a really bad defense. Should be able to score. I think they scored more than 1 goal per match, or pretty much anyone that has scored more than 1 goal per match is in the race for getting into the World Cup. I guess besides Costa Rica, who's in the race, but has only scored 8 goals in 11 matches. So that's a big concern. We'll get them in a second. I think from where I sit, Honduras have just played so poorly that I don't know if I can back them. And there's been a lot of staff and player issues and a lot of things like that. I guess nothing as bad as El Salvador threatening to boycott a match, but that ended up getting settled, I guess. Mexico then hosting the U.S. in probably the most interesting or biggest match on this calendar date. U.S. are in big injury troubles right now. They are probably going to have to play Gio Reyna out of position. They do have Tyler Adams, I believe, as his number 6, as an important central defensive midfielder to really try to limit Mexico's chances. Mexico's been really struggling to score goals, though. So I don't know how important it is really to sit back and defend as you would expect at Estadio Azteca. Ultimately, I think the U.S. has the ability to go forward. Most of their good players seem to be attackers on the wings, like Pulisic, who hasn't been great, but has been playing a lot for Chelsea. So that's good for him to be in somewhat of a form, or at least playing a lot, considering how injured he's been over the years. And where I sit from Mexico's point of view is they don't really score goals. So seeing them as a half a goal favorite, certainly it's their biggest rival. Certainly they see themselves going through as they're really more worried about their World Cup participation and how they do there than even qualifying. Whereas the U.S. is still a little bit, I think, snake bitten from not making the last World Cup, that it's still in a lot of the U.S. men's national team, staff, club, players. It's a lot in their minds about trying to make sure they get in. I do think the U.S. has an interesting dilemma in front of them. I don't know that I trust Greg Berhalter to really make the right decisions. I think he is not a fool, but I think he does some things that I just don't really agree with. There are some rumor that the U.S. might not play their strongest lineup because they know that their next match against Panama is really the big one. If they can get a point there, then ultimately Panama would not be able to catch them, and that would be enough for them to get through. We'll see. But ultimately, I think, and I guess there are 3 matches here, but still El Salvador's not close enough, I don't think, to get anywhere besides 4th. So we'll leave that to the side. It's really the top 5 sides going for 4 spots, really, to me, is how it sounds. But from I guess to keep going with the U.S. and Mexico, Mexico, they've really struggled to score goals. I don't think that Raul Jimenez getting healthy or playing a lot more has really changed any of that, because they ultimately have really kind of struggled, I think. And he struggled. The team struggled. They haven't been scoring goals, and they're usually by far the best team in this CONCACAF. So that's disappointing, and I think that's something that I would like to play against. The U.S., you could say they've had Mexico's number. They've done better than them with rotated sides, with strong sides. They've kind of had Mexico's number. I'm kind of surprised also that Mexico hasn't changed their manager, considering how they've been performing. But we'll see, because it's definitely not easy. They don't grow on trees. But so currently leading the U.S., I guess, getting half of a goal after all that said. We'll see what happens with lineups and what this looks like. I do want to make sure that that the U.S. is playing their best players at Mexico if you're going to back them there, because I think playing with any sort of rotation, I think not having John Brooks in the side is a great idea. And I support Greg Berhalter there. And that's one of the best calls he's made, I think. But I do question what the U.S. can really throw out there. And they are missing a lot of players. I think you got to start Weah. I think Reyna's coming in probably in a more central role rather than a wing, because it seems like the U.S. is all wingers, kind of like the Manchester United roster. But ultimately, no McKinney is a big problem. Yunus Musa has been okay, but he was the weaker of the famed MMA midfield. So going to be very interested to see what this U.S. lineup looks like tomorrow night before looking and see what the number does. And I imagine if it's a strong U.S. lineup, it might tick towards a quarter, but we'll see. Next, Costa Rica and Canada. Currently, Canada way ahead in the group qualifying on 25 points, 4 ahead of both the U.S. and Mexico, 8 ahead of Panama, and 9 ahead of Costa Rica. So they're basically qualified. I mean, I think they probably need a point to get to 26, and that would mean it would only get 25 for Costa Rica, and Panama would ultimately, I think that's probably what it is, just ultimately need a point from the last 3 matches. So that should be pretty easily to be done. And as a road favorite here, it's a pick 'em with all the juice on Canada. I'm likely climbing to 1 to maybe a quarter. Costa Rica does look of interest to me, because I think Canada's going to go play defensive football. They've done a really good job. Their manager's been awesome playing counterattacking style, which really has been their kind of way to go. So they're going to play the game that they want to play. I do think that a counterattacking style on the road does seem like a little bit of a question to me as a favorite. So if ultimately Canada does move to a quarter goal favorite, I'll be looking at Costa Rica harder and harder. We'll see what the status of Keylor Navas is. He's been playing for PSG, but mysteriously missed the second half, I guess, due to injury against the U.S. And that's when things kind of went bad for Costa Rica. Not sure that they have a lot of depth, so you're going to need their big players to be there. Brian Ruiz is now, I mean, every day he's aging, but feel like it's 3 more days than the rest of us each day for him. So we'll see what that looks like, but certainly line's trending that direction, and I'll look at Costa Rica if they move to a dog. Moving to South America, and there's a lot on the line here, which is kind of crazy. We'll get to that eventually. The first match is Brazil and Chile. Currently Brazil on 39, Argentina on 35. So they're way ahead. They've already qualified. Others that are of interest, though, Chile are in this race. They're on 19 points. They sit 6th. Currently, Ecuador on 25, Uruguay on 22, Peru on 21, Chile, as I said, on 19, and then Colombia on 17, Bolivia on 15. And I don't think I need to mention Paraguay on 13, but there we go. And then I'll give you Venezuela on 10 as the last one, just so everyone knows what's happening. So Chile currently a goal and a quarter underdog. Brazil have shown that they're so deep that they are playing good players, even though they've already clinched. And that's unfortunate for Chile, who do need some points here. They're currently 2 points out of the playoff structure. They've played 16 matches. Everyone has played 8 matches except for everyone's played 16 with 2 matches to go besides Brazil and Argentina, because they had that crazy call off. But don't think that needs to be played since both have clinched. And I don't think finishing first versus second really matters. But regardless, focusing in now on Chile, who they have 2 matches left. They are in a position to potentially qualify despite not being the best version of Chile I think you've seen for a while. Players of age. They unfortunately finished with a home game against Uruguay, which is definitely problematic for them, because that's a really tough draw. Another team that's in this fight. And from where I sit with Chile is they've been a pretty good defensive side. They do have some good players that are playing in Europe, which I think is the gold standard for soccer, as you've probably already heard in this podcast. But ultimately, from where I'm looking, Chile as a defensive side look very interesting. I do think, though, that they're in a bit of a predicament, because they're 2 points behind Peru, 3 points behind Uruguay. Say they beat Uruguay, that would get them to 22. But if they lose this one, they're going to be in trouble. So I think playing Brazil, they're most likely going to be settling for a point on the road and trying to play as defensive as possible. That does worry me, that Brazil is going to basically be able to put 10 men in the opposing half, play Ederson at like halfway line, essentially, and really just go for the go for gold the whole day and just ping as many balls into the box or score as many goals as possible. And I feel like Chile is going to need to show some offensive attack interest, which I don't know where they're going to score because they're unlikely to overpower Brazil in the interior on set pieces and things like that. So they're going to need some counterattacking opportunities, which there probably will be some. I just don't know if they get enough. Only getting a goal and a quarter, certainly it's more than a goal. That's a big number. Brazil, though, is so tough at home, so tough in general. They have so much depth that when you're tired, they're going to bring on 4 or 5 new guys that are going to basically be this one Bs, the 1As that started, or maybe even better players. So that's a big concern for me. I think Chile, based on what they need, is certainly the side you'd want here, whereas Brazil doesn't really care about this matchup. But I don't think this match is going to be decided by who needs what. I think it's based on the talent discrepancy. And ultimately, I generally don't want to be backing the team that needs something. I do think Chile is going to try to keep this as low scoring as possible. Maybe better look at the under 2.5 as opposed to Chile getting a goal and a quarter, because I don't know that Chile score. But then again, that's reaching. I think it's going to be hard to see Brazil not at least getting twice on the scoreboard. Colombia then hosting Bolivia, and this is probably the biggest story I think in CONMEBOL. Colombia currently on 17 points in 7th place. They are 5 points off the 4th place final guaranteed spot, and they are 4 off the playoff spot in 5th. And this was not expected from Colombia, who were supposed to be high flyers in this tournament. They haven't scored in, I'll just count it up just to make sure, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 matches in a row, which is pretty bad. I thought it was more than that. Of course, doing this live, I guess, because they played some friendlies in the way. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 matches in a row. That's what the number was. 7 matches Colombia have not scored against some pretty weak competition. They've gotten gotten some draws out of that, but it's really hard to get any points when you're not winning. And they are in big trouble for it. Now they host Bolivia and are 2.5 goal favorites. So they haven't scored in 7 matches, and they have to win and score 3 goals, essentially. That's going to be hard to do. Bolivia certainly has fractures in its defense. They're probably the weakest team in this CONMEBOL qualifying group, but ultimately are sitting 8th out of 10 ahead of Paraguay and Venezuela, which I think is, yeoman's work, and they've done really well. They have a really good striker who seems to be very old, but I think most of their players really play in Bolivia, and there's not really good talent there. So this is going to be a pretty big shock for them to run into Colombia on the road and then have to deal with what should be a pretty good crowd, I would imagine. There's some big cities across Colombia. I'm not sure where this match is being played exactly. But I think from where I sit, my opinion really on Bolivia is that they have been competitive. They've had some big blowout losses. So that's probably what's going to keep me off of this. But ultimately, Colombia not scoring in 7 matches. They certainly playing one of the worst defenses on their continent is going to help them a lot. But I don't know that it solves their challenge. It scores them 3 goals. And I think 2-0 is more than satisfactory to them. 1-0 probably is. They just want to score and then want to get 3 points because that will put them in better shape. On 20 points, they'll at least be within striking distance, hopefully, of Uruguay and Peru. Paraguay then hosting Ecuador. Currently, Paraguay a quarter goal underdog at home with all the juice. Ecuador surprising 3rd place right now. They've been a lot better than I think people expected. Haven't really scored a lot of goals, but ultimately have 25 in 16 matches. So maybe I should take that back. But ultimately, Paraguay, they're in 13th. They're pretty close to the bottom. Even with 2 wins, they get to 19. That'll put them to 6th. So they're pretty much done. So hard to know what to expect from Paraguay. I wonder if Newcastle didn't let Almiron go back, though. You'd hope that they would be fine with that because he's not really starting for them, et cetera, safe in the Premier League. But regardless, Paraguay, they've shown that they can defend. They've played well, I think, in this competition, struggled for results lately, and that's what's kept them out of the way. But ultimately, they've scored 9 goals in 16 matches, the lowest by far, and that's the biggest problem for them. I think playing a really tight, close match with Ecuador, who probably see a point as a decent result, probably want to win, will likely have more possession, but that sets them up for counterattacking opportunities for the home team in Paraguay. So I'm interested in Paraguay. I got to see what that lineup looks like. Of course, I can say that for everybody. It's probably a broken record at this point. But Ecuador certainly on 3rd place. I don't know that they really deserve it based on how well they've played, because I think they've been kind of all over the place, and their offense hasn't been great throughout the competition, despite scoring 25 goals. Which is actually a more impressive number than I expected. Uruguay and Peru, currently Uruguay a 1-goal favorite at home. This is a big one, 4 and 5. Uruguay on 22, Peru on 21. So this might decide who gets in this. A victory, home victory for Uruguay would be a big, big deal. Though I'm not really a believer in their offense, I got to say. I mean, they have the big names in Luis Suarez and everyone else, Cavani, all the others, and they have a lot of good players throughout Europe, but I just don't know that they're really that clinical or that talented. And I feel like their defense has been a little bit weaker as Diego Godin has aged, and Jimenez from Atletico Madrid hasn't really been that strong in a pretty porous Atleti defense, especially by their standards this season. Peru, on the other hand, have been a great moneymaker in this competition. I think they're not expected to be where they're sitting right now in the playoff position, which could get them to the World Cup ultimately. And when you look at their schedule, I mean, and I guess the better way to describe them is, rather than going their schedule first right away, is that they like to sit back and counter. And that's like a perfect international status or style or strategy, especially because they have some speed up front and they have some good attackers that can really take and use the space that's given to them as they sit back and defend. I think as a 1-goal underdog on the road, that seems of most interest to me based on really how I expect a game to play. I think from where I sit, Peru are total interest to me as a road underdog to Uruguay, especially at that number of +1, and they host Paraguay in their final match. So I think they're certainly in a position to sit back, try to get 1 point here. That'll keep them 1 point behind Uruguay, and then go for a victory in their final match against Paraguay, sitting 9th in the table. And I think that would be a huge step for them going in the right direction, potentially qualify for another World Cup, because I think they did make the last one, which is, of course, very impressive. And I think so that'll then take us next to, my alarm goes off, of course. That'll then take me to Africa for qualifying here. 2 legs. Crazy. I guess all the division winners ended up getting into this. But Morocco currently a 1/4 goal favorite on the road at the Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo. Don't really know a ton about the Congo side, but I imagine they're a pretty big underdog. And this number seemed a lot lower than I think it should have been. Mali then hosting Tunisia, currently Mali a 1/4 goal favorite. Based on how the teams performed in the Africa Cup of Nations, Tunisia, I think, did a lot better than people expected. But ultimately, I think that this line reflects who they are. They're not really a great side, but getting a 1/4 only on the road at Mali seems a little bit short to me. It does seem like all the juice is on Mali. So maybe this is climbing to a half. And at that point, maybe looking at Tunisia is worth it. Cameroon then hosting Algeria. Cameroon, a 1/4 goal favorite coming off of AFCON. Algeria might be a little bit familiar with their surroundings, or a little bit more than they would be. Cameroon were not very impressive in AFCON despite having home field advantage. So I'm sure that set up a lot more pressure, and there were a lot of restrictions on attendance based on COVID vaccination status and things, which led to a lot of other issues, which we won't get to. But ultimately, as a 1/4 goal favorite, I feel like that's a fair home number. Egypt then a pick 'em at home to Senegal, and it still seems like a lot of respect for Senegal, who were favored and ended up winning the AFCON finals on penalty kicks, but there wasn't a lot of offense that was happening. I guess there were some good saves by Egypt, to be fair. But going on the road to Egypt is a much bigger step for Senegal than playing at a neutral site in Cameroon. I think where Egypt are a pick 'em at home with all the juice right now, or most of it, that's probably a little bit more fair of a line. I imagine they'll creep up to a 1/4. If that happens, then maybe looking at Senegal is worth it, because they're so talented and they have a lot of clear momentum after winning AFCON. And I think that really will override the revenge factor for Egypt, who had lost out on penalties in the final. Next, and looks like, not last but not least, okay, still in Africa, we have Ghana and Nigeria. Currently, Ghana pick them at home with most of the juice. And that seems a little bit respectful to the home team. I think I'm looking to see how high Nigeria get. They were pretty disappointing in AFCON, went out early, I think, to Tunisia. And that was disappointing, especially for a team that played pretty well in the group stages. But that's what knockout football does. I think when they play against Ghana here, if this moves to a 1/4, I'll be looking at Nigeria a lot more closely, because they have a lot of players that have been really performing really well across Europe. And I guess the last one that I'll cover is in CONMEBOL back to South America for Argentina hosting Venezuela. Currently, Argentina a 2-goal favorite, big number, but Venezuela has been so bad sitting bottom of the table, have allowed 30 goals, only worse by Bolivia at 35, which is another reason to potentially see Colombia scoring more, to circle back to that other matchup. But ultimately, Venezuela is a 2-goal underdog. I'm just not sure that they're, unfortunately, with all the economic problems, plus they had a lot of good players that were not available to them in weird circumstances. I think working out moves in Europe that weren't available to them in qualifying early, and that really put them behind the 8 ball and has really sunk the ship to the bottom of of CONMEBOL. And I'm not sure that I want to fade Argentina, who have so much talent, so much strength, and seem to play a lot better together than they do for their club teams. Talking about you, Lautaro Martinez. But ultimately, that's the first step or first, I guess, round of matches, wave of matches, if you will, in the World Cup qualifiers for this end of March window. I'm the real_G Warner on Twitter. Feel free to hit me on there if you've got any questions or want me to go over anything a little bit more deeply. And would love to converse on Twitter or any place you see this, YouTube. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.